That will 10x DeFi overnight.
Today I sit down with co-founder of Chainlink, live in New York City, SmartCon.
Our industry is going to enable the next stage or the next version of the global financial system.
About what's really next for crypto.
From your conversations in DC, is the Clarity Act just a matter of how and when, and no longer a matter of if anymore?
I think there's still actually an if.
This is an unfiltered conversation.
Right? I mean, you just had communist mayor elected in New York City. Like, it's, the Twilight Zone now.
And crypto's JavaScript moment.
And what this should do is the same thing that JavaScript did for the internet.
Which is about to usher in billions.
When do you think the moment is that tokenization goes mainstream?
Click the like button right now to support me, and let's start.
I want to start, obviously, New York is a buzz right now with tokenization, RWA's blockchain, but you were just in DC talking to both Democrats and Republicans. What were some of the takeaways from that?
So I think the thing that people in DC are starting to realize is that our industry is about much more than cryptocurrencies. And this is the idea we've been trying to explain for a while now, for most of this year, ever since this new administration came in. And it became very clear that the US's stance on cryptocurrencies and digital assets will be, I would say, maybe the key determining factor for the speed at which our industry grows. And we've been trying to explain to folks for a while that cryptocurrencies are a good initial use case of this technology, but the financial system getting rebuilt in a better, more reliable, more secure, more transparent way is really going to be the big long-term value. And the interesting thing is, I think that both the Democrats and the Republicans are starting to understand that. And so this market structure bill, I feel, is not just about cryptocurrency anymore. It's about cryptocurrencies, DeFi, and also the early stages of digital assets and institutional tokenization. And that's really good for our industry, because once someone in DC understands the value of our industry is far beyond speculative coins, which they don't like, it takes on a new importance, right? Because the question of, do you care if the US is the leader in speculative coins? You sometimes, yeah, maybe you do. Some of them do. Do you care if the US is the leader of the global financial system? Everyone will say yes, right? So once people understand that our industry is going to enable the next stage or the next version of the global financial system, the US's role in that becomes very important, regardless of the party you're in. And so that's been very helpful that's finally happening. That understanding is finally starting to take root. And what I've seen personally is that once someone in DC understands that, all of the negative things about crypto that they've come to historically think about, like Bitcoin's used for money laundering, or cryptocurrencies are hyper-speculative dumpster fires or whatever, all of that kind of falls away. So that's what I've started to see happen, which is really good for our industry, because then our industry's success in the United States is aligned with the United States' goals, which is what you want.
From your conversations in DC, is the Clarity Act just a matter of how and when, and no longer a matter of if anymore?
I think there's still actually an if. I think you're going to have midterms, and then midterms could reshuffle some things in terms of who can vote for what. I think that everyone is trying to get this done before the midterms, because the midterms will be very distracting. And so that's why everyone is focused to get this done by the end of this year, by the beginning of next year at the latest. Because in the midterms, who knows what's going to happen, right? I mean, you just had communist mayor elected in New York City. Like, it's, the Twilight Zone now, right? Like, God knows what's going to happen next. I don't know what's going to happen. It's who knows? The lizard people will come out. Who knows what's next? I have no clue. So no, I don't think it's a guaranteed outcome in this administration. I think there's always stuff that could make it harder. You know, like if you have another FTX-like failure, if you have, you know, something that makes cryptocurrencies seem less positive in their relationship with the U.S. consumer, those things could throw cold water on a lot of it. But right now, I think it's progressing well. And I think the White House, just like they were really involved in the stablecoin legislation, are very involved in this. And we actually have Patrick Witt from the White House coming to speak here with us and share his views on these topics, which is another, I think, for all of you, clear sign of, you know, the level of commitment and interest from DC in our industry's progress.
In this new era of crypto regulation, this new paradigm, how does Chainlink fit in?
So Chainlink is actually built to enable a world of automated compliance and kind of proactive automated regulation. What I mean by that is instead of codifying the regulatory rules or compliance requirements into legal documents and then telling banks and fintechs and startups, this is what you have to comply with, you can actually codify how the system has to work. So if you use a smart contract that does X, Y, and Z, then your transaction is compliant. Wonderful. Sounds good to me. Now the burden of compliance goes way down. Guess who's going to make and power the smart contracts that define and execute X, Y, and Z? Chainlink. This is what we meet with SEC about. This is what we released here. Well, we released it before, but this is what UBS announced using with us here at the conference, the Digital Transfer Agency Standard. So transfer agency is a great example. There aren't other open transfer agency contracts and standards that you can use right now to implement transfer agency for fund tokenization. And transfer agency is this category of regulated activity that has to happen on chain and has to happen against set conditions. And now it does. So actually, in reality, and by the way, transfer agency needs price data. It's not possible, well, not price, valuation data, NAV, net asset valuation data, which Chainlink is the largest Oracle system for delivering. So really what all this regulation will do, if it happens through on-chain contracts, is it'll skyrocket the demand for the contracts and the Oracle systems that power those contracts, you see? Because it'll be impossible to transact without those contracts. You legally won't be able to transact without the transfer agency contract. You legally won't be able to transact without the compliance contract. And the compliance contract needs an identity oracle. And the transfer agency contract needs a net asset valuation data oracle. And the other regulated contract needs, two more oracles. So really the more the complexity of the contract grows and has to deal with external data and systems, the more the amount of chains grows, the more the risk grows between making everything work across the chains and across all the different systems, the more you're going to need a system like Chainlink to simplify that risk down or eliminate that risk. And the challenge, in addition to that, is actually going to be, how do I, as a developer, write code against all these contracts? So if I have to deal with a transfer agency contract and a compliance AML KYC contract, and I have to get data in very specific ways, and I have to do reporting in certain ways, what is the system in which I write my code to do all of that? And that's the system that we released here, the Chainlink runtime environment, which is the place where you can write a single piece of code, a workflow, and that single piece of code can manage your application and your smart contract across chains, but also across all of these regulated contracts. And it can define its relationship with those contracts. That's a useful thing, I think.
And Chainlink Runtime Environment, CRE, New York City has been a buzz. This was a new announcement at SmartCon this year. Let's go into that a little bit more. What impact will that have on crypto?
So the impact that we hope it'll have is it'll reduce the time that it takes for a developer and the amount of developers needed to build institutional smart contracts. So we've built a lot of institutional smart contracts. We just launched one with UBS into production for their tokenized fund. We announced our work with the Central Bank of Brazil and the Central Bank of Hong Kong and Inter, the largest bank in Brazil. We have a huge list of folks we've done smart contracts with. JP Morgan, ANZ Bank, UBS, a whole huge list. Everyone can look it up. The DTCC, we've done corporate action, SWIFT, whole bunch. And what we found is that when you make a smart contract in the institutional context, you start to have 5, 10, 15, 20 pieces of code that you have to manage, that do different things, written in different languages, that no one really understands other than one engineer or two engineers what each piece of code does. And it's also not really reusable. So you're building an institutional smart contract bespoke every time. And I can see some of the engineers kind of nodding their heads as I'm saying this, because I recognize some of them. And so what you're going to get with the CRE is a place where you can write a single piece of workflow code. And that one piece of code defines how your smart contracts work across chains, how the contracts are deployed to those chains, how the data flows into those contracts, what are the conditions under which those contracts interact across chains, what are the conditions under which those contracts are allowed or not allowed to do things. So they have to check an identity, they have to check the solvency of the coin and whether or not proof of reserves was attached to the coin. Whatever other checks that you want it to do. And now you'll have a single place to write that code. And what this should do is the same thing that JavaScript did for the internet and what the EVM did for tokenization in our industry, is that it should massively simplify the process of building smart contracts that work across chains, utilize external data, deal with identity, deal with internal accounting and other systems from existing infrastructure. And if that happens, then we should see a boom in innovation, right? We should see a large amount of new blockchain use cases, new smart contracts, new institutional contracts that were easy for people to build and launch on CRE that would have taken them 10 engineers and 10 months, but now it takes 2 engineers and 2 months. And then we want to get it down to 1 engineer in 1 week. And don't worry if you're an engineer, there's going to be so many of these contracts that you want a tool like this to make it simpler for you. I think as the smart contract, an institutional smart contract boom happens, it'll be a really booming, growing category of developer jobs and kind of jobs for IT folks in general.
So this is Chainlink's JavaScript moment, Chainlink's EVM moment. That's when all the ICOs popped up in 2017. Obviously, this is more compliant, but with that explosion of new dApps, new builders on the network, what use cases do you see really taking advantage of this?
Stable coins, tokenized funds, really any real-world asset, the management of flows between chains, anything that requires compliance, anything that requires transfer agency. And really what's going to happen next with CRE is that after this initial period where anyone can write a workflow and we enable the deployment of more and more workflows, we're going to look to go to a system where others can write templates and workflows that are connected to infrastructure, and then they can sell those workflows to other developers. So there's like an ecosystem of workflows that you can run that's already pre-connected to a bunch of high-quality data sources, payment systems, and so on. But I think it's all the tokenization use cases that you see right now, especially the ones that are more and more complex. Like the one that we did with the Central Bank of Brazil and the Central Bank of Hong Kong was about trade flows, where there was the central bank digital currency of Hong Kong, the e-Hong Kong dollar, There's a central bank digital currency of Brazil through their DREX program in the central bank called the Brazilian Real, the digital Brazilian Real. Those were the two tokens, the two currencies over CCIP. And then CRE synchronized and did the CCIP steps or invoked them. And then CRE also dealt with a bunch of trade-related systems around things like bills of lading and other complicated things related to a trade flow. So I actually think that the more complex a smart contract use case is, the more it's going to need something like CRE to simplify and make it possible.
Sergey, let's talk about privacy. Because to me, one of the biggest hurdles for TradFi institutions entering the space is they don't want everything public. These are private companies. Chainlink recently announced private smart contracts enabled by Chainlink. Describe the impact of this.
So privacy is really one of, if not maybe the final big unlock that our industry needs to go to true mainstream adoption. Privacy exists on the internet. It exists in financial systems. And I think our industry has always really valued transparency and the ability to verify things. I think that the transparency is valuable, the ability to verify things, that's not going away. But for certain categories of really important transactions, you do need privacy. If you don't have privacy, you just won't have certain transactions happen. And that would really limit what our industry was possibly used for, right? You could only use it for certain types of, like a limited group of transactions or a limited group of assets or tokens. Generally speaking, what Chainlink privacy is built on and what Chainlink confidential compute does is it gives you a place that sits next to a blockchain to write workflow code that's private. And then you can prove back to users and back to whoever you want, regulators or counterparties, that the workflow code that you ran does what you say it does. So if the workflow code that you ran was supposed to check an identity, verify, the balance in someone's bank account, and check that they weren't on a sanctions list, the details of their bank account, the details of their identity, the details of their status of these things, won't be disclosed, but it'll be verified. That verification will be put on chain, and it'll trigger the next stage in the contract. And anyone, like a regulator, that wants to verify that next stage of the contract was triggered correctly because there was a system somewhere that verified all these things, they can check that, but all that personal information remains private, right? And so there are trillions of dollars in transactions that, unless you can do a verification like that, simply can't happen on chain. So that is really the benefit of privacy. It's really going to unlock, I think, a lot of identity. It's going to unlock a lot of compliance. It's going to unlock a lot of institutional capital that can flow on chain. And I think that the ability to write a workflow that defines all these other steps I told you about, and then selectively make certain parts of that private, will make writing a workflow even more valuable. Because now you're writing a workflow to manage the complexity of the different chains and the different contracts and the different oracles. And you're writing a workflow because there's no other way that you can privately compute or privately prove something to a chain, like identity information or compliance with something. So it's I think it's going to be a very powerful tool and unlock for our industry.
Tokenization has been a buzzword for the last year and a half with crypto. When do you think the moment is that tokenization goes mainstream?
So I think it started to happen more and more for stablecoins. I think stablecoins are basically, going more and more mainstream, I would say, this year with the Genius Act. I think stablecoins are very popular in emerging markets already, even before this year. I think tokenization doesn't exactly mean stablecoins for most people. I think for most people it means things other than cash. So tokenizing stocks, bonds, funds, equity, real estate, any number of other things. You know, I'm a very optimistic person about our industry. It's November. Okay. So, you know, we just missed the cutoff because the cutoff for me is usually November. So if you ask me this question in October, the answer every year is this year. I'm putting this year. It's November now. So, you know, it's next year. So now it's next year. My track record on being right on this is not great. I've been doubling down on this for about 5 years in this pattern. So just to give you a big kind of grain of salt on all this. But I think now with the regulatory clarity, the amount of people we see go into production, like UBS went to production live with, you know, real value today with us, with the transfer agency standard and system, and you know, that's a very conservative Swiss bank. You know, those people do not make rash decisions. They are very thoughtful, calm, conservative people. I think next year is very possible. What you really need is you need a flywheel of commercial and market success, right? So you have all this on-chain cash, stablecoin, tokenized deposits, CBDCs, whatever. I don't really even care like what form it's in, whatever form you want. Then you have assets, and you need markets, right? So why is DeFi successful? There's a bunch of speculative assets. There's a bunch of people making markets. There's a bunch of people making lending markets and generating yield. So DeFi is a big thing, right? Like, makes sense. There's a market. There's a pattern of commercial success that you can participate in, you know, many different ways. Okay, you know, where is that pattern in institutional digital asset tokenization? Doesn't exist, right? You have kind of the building blocks. You have the stablecoin. You have the on-chain cash. Okay, good. That's people that can buy stuff. We have many cases where we've integrated off-chain systems to buy tokenized things. So it's not even clear that, you know, the on-chain cash in the stablecoin form is the critical factor. I think you need enough high-quality assets on-chain, and you need people, retail, institutional counterparties, buying tens of billions of that stuff. You need lending markets that generate superior yield on a tokenized form of an equity or a commodity or a fund than you would get off of it in the traditional system. I think you need 24/7, 365 trading environments for tokenized equity, so that, you know, when the market closes on that equity in wherever, you just have more volume start happening on the 24/7, 365 tokenized equity market. But where's the tokenized equity, right? So I think we're kind of at the point where the assets are going to go on chain, and you're going to start seeing the formation of these markets next year.
And by the way, the CFTC, I love it. Hell yeah. And to back that up, the SEC, the CFTC, they seem to have never been in the history of crypto more supportive of the crypto industry. SmartCon, I believe, started in New York City in 2022, and it's years later, and it seems like the industry has totally evolved, changed. Can you talk about that transition and what's different now?
Yeah. At this point, you know, it's hard for me to imagine how to make these regulators more positive. I mean, I can imagine a few things that would be like unreasonable for them to do, but just like release guidance and, you know, we'll let the crypto people write it, whatever. But, you know, they're within the realm of reason. They're about as positive as it's going to get. There is already a new SEC chair. There isn't yet a new CFTC chair. The people under consideration for the CFTC chairmanship are extremely pro-crypto, and I think that's even a factor in determining, you know, whether or not they'll, you know, get that chairmanship. And the SEC and the CFTC have already released joint statements around deep collaboration to simplify things for the crypto industry. I really do think that simplification is what the industry needs to make more of those tokenized assets. And I think we're going to get it one way or another. So to your earlier question, if the market structure bill doesn't go through, then we'll be in a world where the SEC and the CFTC have to create guidance, they have to create clarity through guidance and through rulemaking instead of legislation, which they will. So even if the market structure bill doesn't go through, which hopefully it does go through, right? That's what we all want. The very pro-crypto SEC and CFTC will create guidance and clarity and rulemaking. They'll create rules, which I think will also accelerate the issuance of these assets on chain. But it's like an extremely positive environment. I think our industry really has to make the most of it. I think like the 3 years that we have now with this administration, with the Trump administration that's been so supportive of our industry and pro-crypto, is really a unique moment in time. And we should make the most of it because, as I mentioned before, God knows what's going to happen next. Like, I have no idea. It just gets weirder by the day at this point, So, we should make the most of it.
And you were in DC in the room where it happens. For the Clarity Act, would you say 60% chance it's probably happening before midterms or more or less?
Before midterms, yeah. I think it's more than 50%. I think we're in like the 70, 80% realm. I do see the White House actively, pushing to make things happen. I think that's an important factor. I think they need to turn the lights back on in all the government buildings. That would help. So they need to end the government shutdown. But yeah, before the midterms, I can see it at 70%, maybe more, 80%. I can see it for sure. There's a lot of political will. There's still more education also. Like, there's many senators and congressmen that don't understand what DeFi is. They don't understand why blockchains reduce money laundering rather than increase it. Money laundering in the current system's up to 5%. Money laundering in the crypto system's below 1%. It's like some shocking, revelation. But it's true, right? So if we were in a situation where everyone was super educated and they still didn't want to do it, that'd be one thing. But we're in a situation where a lot of these congressmen and senators are still, once they understand what our industry does and how good it is for their goals, for the US and for the financial system, I've pretty much almost always only seen them get on board. So I think if we can educate more and more of the congressmen and the senators on both sides of the aisle, a lot of these concerns that they have just evaporate based on the truth of what our industry actually does versus, the scary boogeyman of like what it's been kind of perpetuated to seem like it does.
Sergey, Altcoin Daily speaks to an audience of over 3.5 million across all social platforms. You've been on the show, and in one of our conversations recently, you've talked about this being maybe 1997, 1998 internet. What will 2001 look like, or 2005? Because for the internet, it changed so drastically. What's going to change for crypto?
Well, I hope we don't have a 2001, just to be clear. I'll just comment on the 2005 after. But I think it's really those markets and that commercial loop of success. So that's what you see in DeFi, right? You see this big commercial loop of success. Loop's a funny word in that world, by the way, but there's a lot of loop going on, sometimes a little too much. But all that aside, you see a flywheel of success, right? You see how DeFi, if it gets more capital, how it can scale to be even more successful. You can see how it provides value. You can see how it's a commercial opportunity that people want to get involved in, right? They want to launch DeFi protocols. They want to be vault curators. They want to be on the risk teams. They want to be part of it because there's a reason, because it works. We haven't seen that yet for the institutional side of our industry. I think when that takes off, I think that's what it'll look like. In another 5 years, we'll be looking at a world, I think, where DeFi is much bigger than it is today. I think DeFi will be the innovation area of the financial system. So DeFi will be the place where you do permissionless innovation, where you're not slowed down by regulation, you're not slowed down by some guy in a suit. You just do stuff. And some of it works and some of it doesn't work. And the stuff that works, lives, and the stuff doesn't work die in like this creative destruction capitalist model, which is, by the way, the right model, in case you're wondering. Keep that in mind next election, by the way. But all that aside, once that flywheel of success starts to happen, you'll start to see more and more institutions go on chain, right? So that'll actually feed DeFi. So the thing that I think isn't fully clear to people yet, because it hasn't happened yet, but I'm a big believer in, is that DeFi, will continue to do permissionless innovation. It'll continue to invent new stuff, great stuff, like mind-blowing cool stuff, which I'm a big fan of, and we're all a big fan of. But then the capital into that stuff will come from these institutions because their clients have all the money. They do. It's all the world's money in these institutions held by the clients, and the institution services the clients, right? And so the clients are going to say like, oh wow, look, I can get 8% on the US dollar in DeFi. Let me make this percentage of my treasuries convert to DeFi. I mean, that's amazing. That's unbelievable. That will 10x DeFi overnight if that happens. Make the yield go down, but it'll 10x DeFi overnight. That's what it's going to look like. It's going to look like DeFi right now is servicing the degen community. How to create more loops with, juice it with some token, some stuff. Do it, please. I'm a fan of it. I really am. I'm not kidding. But once the success of DeFi is driven by institutional users and clients, DeFi will adapt. And it's already adapting, right? Because you see things like Aave Horizon, you see more institutional versions of DeFi because these folks realize this too. So I think that's what it'll look like. I think the institutional world and the DeFi world and the non-blockchain world and the blockchain world will just merge. It'll just be the financial system. And cryptocurrency will also be part of that. Cryptocurrency will be classified as like a commodity or something, and it'll go in the commodity part of the global financial system. And the global financial system will run on blockchains, smart contracts, Oracle networks, and it'll be very complex. And hopefully it'll be managed through CRE workflows. So that's kind of where I think we might be in 5 years.
And Chainlink connecting all of it. Sergey, thank you so much for sharing your time. I want to get a picture with you. Give it up. Thank you.